Welcome back to On Guard Cigar Salon, where we are four leather guys who talk about kinky topics that affect us today. I am joined with Bob Goldfarb, Bannon, Vince, the Bondage Otter, and today we wanted to get together and review a video that we did this time last year, but we were not together. I mean, we're breathing the same air now. Isn't that great?
It is great. It is great.
So we did this for Leathermen's discussion group, which is an organization here in San Francisco, and I think there's someone who can talk a little better about what's LDG.
LDG is the Leathermen's discussion group. It was founded in 1996. I actually started attending in their second year of doing programs. They do educational demonstrations as well as how-to programs and have been providing education continuously in all of that time.
Yeah. So they have a YouTube channel where they put up everything that they've ever done. And how long has it been going on for?
Let's see, 96 was the first year, and they've probably been doing video for maybe 6 or 7 years, something like that.
Yeah. I want to say since 2015 or some is when they started videos.
So you're the younger generation. When did you start watching LDG or going to it?
I went to my first LDG actually in 2016, took a little bit of a hiatus, and then came back, which was actually the first time I met Bob. So that was in 2017.
So you're blaming Bob for this.
It's all Bob's fault.
So, and we were on this panel talking about switching, which is going from being top to a bottom, depending on who we play with. And we all identify as switch. Is that what we came up with during this? Yep. Why do you like to switch?
Well, when I'm topping, I like doing to someone else the things that I know that I enjoy as a bottom. Mm-hmm. And I started out my sexual career pretty much exclusively as a bottom. And
I think that's how most people start out, no?
Yeah.
As you're younger?
Not me.
You didn't? Oh, you started out as a top.
I regret it, but yeah. Because I had a lot of bottom-shamey feelings, which I talk about in the LDG video, and that stopped me from embracing my desires as a bottom. And so I was topping not because I enjoyed it, but because that was what I thought was masculine, or in a tox mask sort of way.
Yeah, you're a top. Yeah.
So yeah, but then we softened over time, and now I've gotten to play with some really great tops who have turned me into a true switch, which has been great.
And you, Race?
I came out in the scene as a top and a dom, and I really enjoyed it. I came out of the gate that way, and when I started to have switch feelings, I suppressed them. I bought into my own top-dom bullshit, and it kept me from exploring that for years and years and years, and finally I did, and now I consider myself a complete switch.
But enough of us talking about it. Let's watch the video, and we'll explain more.
Thank you for coming tonight. It has been on my mind to have a discussion of people who identify as switch for quite some time. LDG has had some history of, talking to specific DOMs or subs or getting into the headspace. But I don't know that we historically have ever had a panel such as this. And so I'm really excited to have you tonight. I'm going to start first with a simple, or at least an introductory question, which is, how did you get here? How did you come to identify as switch, and what was your path? So I'm going to start. Vince, you're going to go first.
So I think for me, as I think a lot of people did, I had a lot of internalized homophobia, my own bottom shaming, and a lot of Catholicism growing up and coming out here to California when I was 18. And I think for a while I was like, oh no, I'm just going to be a top. I started doing bondage and started doing rope as a top. And then at a point, it kind of became an internal joke that I was an Instagram top, where I would want to top for anything that was public, but in private, I really just wanted someone to tie me up and beat the shit out of me. And the more that I got to be in the community and meet people and get to play, and have more consistent partners, I started stepping into both roles and have now found personalities on both sides of the fence that I really, really enjoy. And so it has been a slow coming out as switchy and a slow growing in comfort of both. I'm kind of almost happy I started fake topping, because it gave me a baseline from which, now that I actually enjoy it and have a place to be in it, I feel like it's come much more naturally to switch. So that's how I've ended up here.
Chris?
Hi, and it's great to be on this panel with everyone that we've all played together at one point or another. So
It's very
we switched it up
incestuous
between each other, which is great. How'd I get here? It wasn't really a path I was choosing, or I just kind of fell into it. I started as a bottom when I was younger, and I loved bottoming. But as my experience level grew and grew, and I think this happens to a lot of people, as you get more experience under your belt and different play dynamics and different skill sets of like bondage, impact play, other things, you start teaching other people how to do it. And I think probably when I was around 30, one of a really close mentor of mine was Fred Katz. And he would show me pictures and tell me all about the men lining up to play with him over and over. And that's kind of the light bulb moment in my head. I was like, yeah, I need to learn these skill sets, and I need to dom and top, and I'll have boys for the rest of my life. So I did. And as I did, I got into that energy. When I dommed, I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the feedback, and I would do what I liked as a bottom. So then it just became a back and forth. It was whoever I was playing with, what did they want to do? I can do that. That's fine. And I've enjoyed it ever since.
Great. We're going to keep going with the quick introductions, and then I'll start poking more. Bob, why don't you tell us about how you put a shout out in your bio, but I thought I'd let you tell us the story. So why don't you go ahead and...
Well, I am also honored to be on the panel, and thank you very much for asking me. And I was a pretty confirmed bottom for certainly the beginning of my SM and other gay career, if you will. And I had a boyfriend at one point, and someone asked me, oh, what percent, top, what percent bottom? And I was like, well, I'm probably 95% bottom. And the boyfriend said, since when? When is the 5%? And I had moved here to San Francisco. I was walking through the Castro, and this guy at Starbucks basically stopped me and chatted me up a little bit. And he looked to me, and everything he said and whatever, I was like, this guy is totally vanilla. And I was like, he was like, well, let's go play. And I'm like, oh, do I really want to, I don't usually do the whole vanilla thing. And I was like, well, but he's very persuasive, and okay, fine. So we go back to my playroom, and he says, okay, here's the deal. You're going to punch fuck me, and not more than a tablespoon of lube. Got it? And I was like, okay, you tell me how to punch fuck you, and I will do that. Anyway, and we just really connected, and I just totally had a blast. And I was like, there is something to this topping thing. And, we played a couple more times before he moved away. And anyway, and I was like, well, let me explore this a little bit more. And, there was a guy who I had lusted after at the gym for years. And I thought I was completely invisible to him. And one day he started to talk to me, and he was like, well, what I want is, nasty dom top and this and that. And he was very specific. And I was like, I will figure this out. And so anyway, so that is sort of my topping origin story. And over time, at least for SM, I probably top maybe 90% of the time now. So it's gone the other direction.
Race, you are an avowed switch, who is pretty vocal about it, and has also had a very deep history of where you came from and where you showed up, where you've become. So do you want to for people who don't know your story, you want to talk a little bit about it?
I really came out of the gate very top and dom. Chris and Bob in particular know that lineage pretty well, and they really for a couple of decades, and then I would kind of tiptoe into fantasizing about bottoming and jerking off, and then finally I decided to, at Inferno, agree to a BDSM bottoming scene with Tony DeBlas, which I figured, why not go right for some of the best? And I liked it. And I still bought into my own top bullshit, I call it sometimes, for a long time, where I really resisted this notion of being a switch and being more fluid about top, bottom, dom, sub. And then some years ago, I had a boy, and that boy really liked for me to get fucked with him. And that I said, okay, this is interesting. And so we did that like a bunch in group settings. Then I had a slave for 4.5 years. And at one point he said, I would really like you to bottom more, not necessarily with me, but like in groups and things. I'm, okay, this is a theme here. This is 2 in a row. And and that was JD Slater. He's pretty out about it. So for those that don't know, and I just took to it like a duck to water. And now I can't imagine myself not being a switch and being an opportunist. I still, on a practical level, probably top 80% of the time, 90% really. From a BDSM perspective, it's probably more like 98%. But in my head, when I jerk off, and even when I play with some people, it's a real 50-50 thing going on in my head. So that's kind of where I came from.
Like, it's not it's not, did you start topping because you had a boss or your bottom, but is it, did you start topping because people were seeking you out because of your experience?
Well, when I started topping, I didn't have the experience as topping. I think it was just more of I got into rope bondage. That was the thing. When I started learning how to tie people up, then I became the dom. And I was really interested in rope bondage, and I think Vince can attest to that as well. And then, yes, people seek you out. And once you have that skill of tying people, nobody can tie themselves up. So once you have that skill, they're like knocking on your door. And that was a move on my part, just because of Fred Katz. Once I learned how to tie people up, then they came to me. It was actually learning that I enjoyed doming and topping. That was kind of a new feeling for me when that happened, and I really liked it. So I liked being in control. But I also like role play. So whenever I do a scene, part of it's a little bit theatrical and acting, and I can get into either role. I just have to switch my mindset into which one it's going to be.
Do you think that that is influenced or encouraged by some of your professional acting?
Is that what we're calling it?
Yeah.
Well, sure. So I've been in front of and behind the camera for 30 years, directing and being in BDSM porn. And when you direct, you become kind of the top. You're directing the scene and you're in control. You are making the decisions of everything that's happening. So yeah, that kind of came naturally to me. Probably it had a little influence there. But sexually, I like both. I truly like both.
I think for me, coming from the opposite perspective, where I started by mostly topping and tying myself up, and then people would say, "Oh, I see you do all of these fun things. I want you to do them to me." I had a really bad first experience with SM as a bottom, and for the longest time in college, I said, "No pain, no BDSM. You know, it's just it's not my jam." And it actually was not until I came to an LDG where Bob Goldfarb was interviewing Daddy Robert. So two of these mega heavy hitting players, and the topic was flogging. And I saw Daddy Robert flog Bob during the intermission of that talk. And then I saw Daddy Robert flog another bottom of his, and the energy between them was just electrifying. It was something that I had never, seen before or experienced before. And me being very timid and shy, I went right up to Bob afterwards and was like, "Hi, you have a really nice mustache, and I think you're sexy. I would like for you to flog me." And one, that was the start of a almost five-year relationship at this point. But it really, it was my first experience with Bob bottoming for an SM context. I was like, holy shit, this is so different than what I expected. This is different than the first experience I had. I want more of this. And from there, it was a bit of an addiction where I wanted to do everything. I wanted to try everything at least 3 times. And that slowly over time allowed me to find myself fitting into, oh, these are things I actually really enjoy bottoming for in an SM context. And also seeing different styles of top play, right? Like as a top with no experience, I had what was in my head, but getting to play with other tops with much more experience, I get to pick a little bit of, oh, I really enjoyed this. I'm going to take that and integrate it in myself. Oh, I really enjoyed that. Oh, I didn't like that so much. It's probably not true to me as a top. So really bottoming has helped me become more comfortable topping because I've gotten to see more styles of how people do it and what I like. So I guess the short answer is being a slut
Yeah.
You can have sex with anyone. Top, bottom, doesn't matter.
Being able to, be on either end of the spectrum enable you to either work out different things in different parts in the different roles that you play. Does topping do something different for you than bottoming does? This is a question for anybody who wants to answer it. Do you get to express a different part of yourself that you don't get to express in other aspects, depending on what role you play?
What I like the most about topping is the end of the scene and the feels you get from the sub or the bottom. And it's so grateful, it's so thankful. They are so euphoric. That washes over me. And I love that. As the sub, I'm so grateful. I'm so euphoric. And so I'm giving that to the Dom for making me feel like that. I enjoy them both. They're both great.
And I think my experience is very, very similar to what Mr. Kristofer is describing. And it's like, I get different things out of each side, and and I do enjoy them both. And that part at the end of the scene is really one of the highlights for me. Whether I'm the top or the bottom. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, it's they definitely fill different needs.
One of the things that I get when I bottom and sub is to let go of that part of myself that always likes to be in control, because I am a wee bit of a control freak. And which has served me extremely well as a Dom. But being able to let go of that a little bit and go with the flow a little more and let somebody else drive is not, it's actually truly cathartic. It's beyond just pleasurable. It's actually cathartic.
Yeah, and I experience that a lot. So I do sex work as well as a pro Dom, and that is the majority of the people who come to me. they have high-powered jobs. They don't want to make another decision, especially in the bedroom. Now, I only dom when I do that, because for me, subbing is also very emotional connection for me and a trust issue with the dom. So I'm okay doming a new sub that I don't know very well, and I learn through the session how it goes, but I won't do the reverse. So yeah, I wouldn't let you poke me. I'd poke you though.
Yeah, professionally. Yeah.
Well, there's a difference between doing sex work and doing personal playtime, for sure. And when you're engaging in BDSM dynamics, there's a lot of trust involved both ways. I think I've built enough of a reputation that new subs trust me not to hurt them, not to go beyond what they're willing to, and trust my experience level of reading what they are able to do. And because they all come with different fetishes and wants, and some want this and some want that, and because of the role play aspect that I've grown into over time, I can take on each of those roles. I can be the daddy, I can be the leather dom, I can be the silly person if they need that, the spanker, whatever. It's a different role, and you define that. And I don't know, that's how I do it.
For anybody, what about how have people responded? So does it just allow you to have a greater number of people to play with, in the fact that you are able to do both sides of it? Or have you had any issues with somebody who was uncomfortable with your ability to switch?
I've ever had someone who was uncomfortable with an ability to switch. I feel like I've had experience, particularly with dom tops, who have been a bit incredulous that no, like if you're a real boy, then you don't switch, which is always a little off-putting to me. I find advertising as a switch tends to create a bit of a self-selecting pool. I feel like I get a lot of my recent play partners have been people who really are just interested in playing, and whatever form that takes. It makes the scenes much lower stakes. Kind of to Kristofer's point, when someone comes to me and they're like, oh, I want you to tie me up, and maybe I've never met them before, that it kind of becomes work, right? It's, you have to put in effort to see, like, what is the chemistry going to be? But when someone comes up and they say, hey, I just want to play, and you can have that conversation naturally, being a switch is helpful, because depending on where the conversation goes, depending on how the rapport builds, I feel like it enables for scenes to be lower stress and more fun and more play, from that perspective. So I would say probably leaning on the side of it does expand the pool. I haven't had too many negative experiences.
When I first came out, coming from a dom to a sub, top to a bottom, and exploring the bottom and sub as new territory, I was pretty sure that a lot of people were going to be put off by that, especially the subs. They were not going to want to play with me necessarily as much. And that's probably why I tiptoed into being a switch more in the beginning than I did eventually. So at one point I was 100% top on recon, for example. And then slowly I began to move my percentage over closer to 50-50. And when it hit 50-50, the number of subs that approached me online doubled. And I thought, okay, that's a weird anomaly. Something's weird. So I happen to have a slave who functions primarily as a dom in most of his life, right? And he also was pretty much 100% on recon. I said, well, you're coming out as a switch with me, and so as you're going to find this. And he did the same thing. The exact same thing happened to him. And I sort of debriefed some of these people, and they said, I trust you. You're coming from a switch perspective, and yet you've obviously got some top cred.
Yeah.
And so I have a level of trust that I might not necessarily have going in cold with somebody who I know is an exclusive top. They may be a brilliant exclusive top, but knowing you're a switch actually helps me. And with rare exception, has a sub said, no, I don't ever play with a switch dom. It's very rare that happens.
And I think that comes from a certain stigma attached to being with a sub. So I think there's a generation and there's a feeling that if you sub, then you can't be a real dom. And I've fallen prey to that myself because I put everything out there. I'm a dom to a pig and a puppy. And when I sub, sometimes in the back of my mind, I'm just like, ooh, are they going to see me taking all this piss down my throat or whatever? And oh, is that going to take away my dominance over them? And of course, I have a puppy who's very sex positive and out there himself. So it's really not an issue. He just doesn't watch it. But I think a lot of that is just the stigma that doms are supposed to be tops and tough, and that's all they do. They can't go the other way. And I think that especially with the generation coming up, everything's a little more fluid. Puppies, they're very playful. We've got all this acceptance of just enjoy yourself. Don't be defined by your roles. And I'm happy to see that happening more and more and more. But I know it confuses a lot of doms.
I've never really found it to be, much of an issue, and that may just be the vibe that I put out in general. But I've never really found it to be an issue.
It's interesting, Race, your story brings, I harken back to, a couple of years ago at Gear Up Weekend, LDG sponsored a conversation between, and Bob, maybe you led these, but I did a conversation, like a discussion group with DOMs and a discussion group with subs, and then coming back together to talk about what each other wanted, and almost unanimously the subs were saying we want to see our DOMs be a little bit more verse, a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more open to not being sort of that 100%. I keep thinking in my head toxic dom, right? But being so stuck in your role that you don't become human.
When I talk to other switches, since I do that a lot now, almost to the one, they report the same thing. Very few people say that it's a problem for them to be a switch, either as a dom or a sub.
Also, I prefer a dom that's has bottomed before. I prefer knowing that the person in control of me in that moment has experienced what I'm experiencing now. For me, that makes it, I trust them way more because they're not going, they know when the rope is pinching, they know what that feeling is, and they're gonna fix that really fast, right, Vince?
Is that right? I don't know.
And I agree with that completely. And I think that, if the top has that bottom experience, it gives them a different perspective. And it's one that I appreciate when I'm bottoming.
Yeah.
And, and the whole, sort of separation between, topping and bottoming, there are a number of people that I play with that I will top them in an SM scene, and then they will fist me, and so it's I think there's a lot of variation there, and I don't see a lot of pushback on the division.
In some ways, what you're speaking to is harkens back to the myth of the old guard. You need to start as a bottom, right, to become a good top. So we've come full circle now to reinforcing the myth of the old guard at this point.
I think there's a difference between saying you must be a bottom before you can top, and saying that as switches, I prefer people who have bottomed before they top. doesn't mean it wouldn't mean I wouldn't play with someone who's never done something before, because how are they gonna get some experience? And I also think as a bottom, I'm like Bob and Kristofer have coached me through what they like as a bottom, right, which has made me a better top, and that's totally valid. At the same time, I do tend to prefer to play with people who have bottomed before, buffed.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that there aren't great tops that are only tops. There are, and they're amazing. But there's both sides.
But even in that, sort of umbrella, there are a number of people who, pretty much exclusively top, like Fred Katz, you mentioned earlier, amazing looking top. And, I asked him one time, I was like, because he is like 100% top. And I asked him, I was like, have you ever bottomed? And he was like, yes, 3 times. I hated it, but I felt I had to do it.
That sounds just like him.
I also think that it's, and he's been public about this when he was alive, and that was Tony DeBlas. I once asked him since he was only known as a top around me, and I said something about him being, you must just think about this top stuff and this dom stuff, and he goes, and he said it pretty much this way: oh, honey, you do know I'm doing to them a lot of what I fantasize being done to me, right?
I think that is a key factor of most tops, actually.
Yep. I really do think that that's an element, certainly in many instances.
That's what I do.
So do I, because it's like right now I would like that.
I mean,
so you're gonna get it.
Part of my motivation for starting Rope Burn actually was again back to something Kristofer said. Once you have a skill, everyone kind of wants you to do it to them. And I found that the more advanced my bondage became, the fewer people that would be willing to tie me up. And so part of starting Rope Burn was, okay, well, I'm going to train a big bunch of tops, and it worked. It did work. It's formed an awesome community of people who I love very much. But a lot of them are now like, oh yeah, Vince, like I'll tie Vince up. And that has been kind of fun.
That is the downside of getting really good at being a dom and being a top, is less people, they're kind of scared to even attempt it with you. And that's why I've actually been lately going with younger doms who are more courageous to do it and try. And even if they make mistakes, I don't care. I'm just enjoying being played with, because nobody will play with me anymore. Everyone thinks you're a big top. So I'm finding the younger generation coming up, and they have a really good skill set, that because they have resources like What's the Safe Word and other places where they can learn, and Rope Burn, where they can learn bondage. And 20-year-olds have a skill that I never had at their age, because they have great resources. So,
and just a small anecdote that's tangential to that, there's a very, very well-known rope top who you've all probably seen fabulous, elaborate suspensions that he's done. He gave me some lessons early on, and I wanted to pay him for the lessons for his time. And when I asked him, like, how can I ever repay you? His answer was just like, oh, well, like, please just tie me up at a party.
Just please tie me up.
And it was so cute, because, he's been doing bondage for 25, 30 years. And just a funny addition.
Somebody asked, we got a question in chat about how you respond when, if you get cold called by somebody or hit up by somebody who wants, who addresses you as a dom immediately. Do you go with that, or do you spend your time to identify that, you actually can be a switch? And
I usually just go with it, because it's like they're sort of giving you a clue of what they want. And so it's like, okay, that's what they want. Call me daddy, fine, whatever. I will call you boy. I will just go with that flow.
Yeah, I agree with Bob. In my recon profile, I say I'm 50-50 switch, and I'm a true switch. You just be good at one or the other. So if they address me as sir, I know which one they want to be, and you just go with it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. If sir seems to be the default that a lot of people go to. Sometimes because they know that's one of my proclivities, they'll say master and right out of the gate. The only time I immediately qualify it is if I sense there's someone who is looking for a 24/7 live-in master-slave relationship, and they will come at you very, very quickly if they think that you have any of that kind of proclivity. I qualify it very quickly saying, for a scene, that'll be great. But
Yes.
yeah.
Especially with unknowns that like on social media will send you messages. I think that is a big rule for me. You know, unknowns, no references. You know, I haven't seen you at parties. I have no idea who you are. You might live in Iowa. That's when
I want to serve you for the weekend.
Yeah.
Who's feeding you? Where are you sleeping?
How do
Are
you know I
serving
wanted
me or am I hosting you?
Your own B&B for,
Right.
for visiting subs, right? Do you think that the incidence of people identifying as switch has increased as we move forward in time in terms of how we as a community evolve?
I think so. The one thing I have to say is when I first went to Inferno in 1986, I went as a very much a total top dom and was expecting everyone to be in a camp of top bottom dom sub. And I was both surprised and pleasantly surprised that at least 50% of the attendees were quite openly switched. They would be dom one time, the next night they're sub to somebody else, and that surprised me. So that was many years ago. With that said, I think younger people coming up today are far less hung up on exclusivity than my generation was.
Well, that doesn't surprise me about an event like Inferno, where a lot of Inferno is education and learning how to do things. So they're trying it on each other.
True.
I do believe that in the last 10 years, it's become more acceptable to be kind of a switch and not look down on as much. And I shouldn't say look down on, it's just, there's just a, you go both ways. How can you be that and a good dom? That's been kind of the thought process, I think, over the last 10 years. And I've seen it open way up. So I'm happy about that.
I think sometimes I fall in the race camp on this, that there is too much education, and sometimes we get so inundated with workshops and classes that people stop playing, and I'm like, no, I want to play. But I think one thing that they have been exceptional at is giving people the tools and resources they need to enable them to explore those things, like Chris said. The other thing I want to add, just to complicate this, is that, you know, DS and SM are not necessarily one and the same, right? Like when I play with Bob in particular, like sometimes we're just doing SM, and there's some inherent control, you know, giving up of control whenever you're doing any sort of SM activity, but there's not the role play of dom and sub in that. It's just SM. And I think that distinction has been teased out in a fair number of play partners I've had, where sometimes we're playing and switching, hurting each other for pleasure, and nobody's really the dom in the situation, or someone who is topping is actually being submissive to me when I'm giving them instructions or things of that nature. So I think that complicates the question a little bit and has been a positive thing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think, you know, as the others have said, it is, you know, more acceptable and, you know, now than it was in the past. And, you know, to sort of get back to the other side of the thing you asked earlier is, if someone says, you know, initially calls you sir, you know, yes, I just go along with that. But I suppose the add-on to that is, what if they don't say? And, you know, they're like, oh, I'm into flogging. And, you know, then I start asking the conversation, you know, of, you know, well, how much experience do you have? And, you know, how much you're into it, but as a top or a bottom, and start that conversation. And sometime they're like, I really want to clog you, I don't have much experience or whatever, and and I'm like, I think we can have fun, and I'll go for it.
Just try to hurt Bob's back. Just try.
That's the other thing, having switches who are like somewhat indestructible that you don't have to worry about hurting if you're trying something for a new time, right? Like they can give you the feedback if something is not right, and as long as you are being attentive, like things shouldn't go wrong as long as you are being deliberate, and that's a plus.
And I think there's also a little bit like we were talking about experience, and people can be intimidated by that experience. And, some people are like, oh, I don't think I can flog you because you have too much experience and I'm just learning. And that's really the ideal situation, is to try something on someone who does have a lot of experience, because they can give you the feedback, and they're also going to be a little more resilient to things that are imperfect.
Witches who have a lot of top and dom experience, almost to the one that I know in my sphere, will say, I just want to play with the man. I just want to have a good time. We'll figure it out. Experience be damned, as long as the intention's there and we're in sync. I don't know anybody who expects the person that they're playing with to rise to some sort of a level of expertise. I just don't know many switches that think that way.
As long as the chemistry is good and the chemistry is there, doesn't matter.
Yep.
We've talked a lot about dom subbing, but what about subs doming? How has that been viewed? I'm 99% sub, and when I top, a crowd gathers to watch the unicorn. Chris, you know something about unicorns, but I've
been raised with unicorns. I blame Vince for that one. I'm really happy when subs, I have a puppy, and this shirt is a joke from What's the Safe Word. Once on one of our shows, he's like, I'm a top. And he said it very high, and it was kind of a joke. Well, the puppy is very dominant, and he kind of is a top, and he's tied me down before and edged me and played with me. And I enjoyed the fuck out of it. It was really good to do that with your partner who usually subs to you. He was just bringing me pleasure in a way I like having pleasure. So yeah, I'm all for it.
My primary partner started primarily as a sub. And I don't think he will mind me sharing this. He and his daddy now switch. And I think it has been really cool to see him get more comfortable topping, doming, and stepping into that role. I think he still strongly identifies as a bottom, but when the mood hits, look out. And that has been really enjoyable for me.
The full moon unicorn, yes.
Yes.
I've played with a number of men who are predominantly sub with me, and then, the moon is full and all of a sudden their top comes out, and I love it. And I don't know many switches that would turn that down.
Because you all talked about, I wish somebody would do this to me, so I'm going to beat the shit out of this boy right now. Do you find yourself envious of a scene that you have created for a sub at the time?
And wish that someone would do it to you?
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, of course.
And how about switching within a scene?
I can, and I like it. I understand that certain people I play with really like to be in one position or another, and I go with that because it's all about what's working for us. But I have a regular partner, play partner, and we actually collar each other for the scene. And I wear his chain, he wears mine, and we swap keys and we hang them on our collars while we play. And so it sort of makes us both plug into, well, I'm kind of your dom and your sub at the same time, and it works for us. And I like playing that way, but I do play with some people that say, I'll switch with you, but not in the same scene.
It's actually funny, that just made me remember when I first started doing porno movies. Some of the first pornos I did was wrestling, and they made you wrestle in a jock strap, and whoever lost got fucked. And we didn't know who it would be. So and sometimes the one who lost really didn't want to lose. And so for me, it's always been this kind of power struggle dynamic. So if I had a sub who all of a sudden just flipped the tables and reversed it on me, I'm not going to be mad.
I have not had enough of these experiences to like, I haven't had that particular experience yet, and which is just an excuse to keep playing.
You're very bratty when you sub, though, so that surprises me. That surprises me a lot.
How dare you?
I'm going to call you out in front of everyone.
Notice Bob and I are staying quiet right now.
I am taking the fifth.
I think for me, I am good doing multiple scenes in succession. Yeah, bratting during a scene or like commenting on Kristofer's rope placement is I think that's slightly different than like switching dom sub energy for me. But yeah, I can do multiple scenes in succession, and anyone who's seen me at a gear up has seen me go from one scene to another and switch. But yeah, for that's not something I've had a lot of experience with.
You know, and I think it can fall into different frameworks. And I think earlier, you know, I mentioned, you know, someone I top in SM, and then it's part of the same scene. We haven't left the room, and then, you know, they will play with my ass. And, you know, it's sort of at this point something of an expectation. And you can set that up. It's like, you know, boy, now you're going to do X. You know, a little bit like the guy who was like, okay, you're going to punch fuck me. And so, you know, you can do it in a different framework, you know, whatever works. If you want to maintain that dom sub thing, you know, you can still direct the scene as the top, but you're going to do this to me now.
Yeah, Chris, when you called Vince out, I I was just thinking about, you know, that dynamic of switching in a scene depending on how bratty someone gets, right? You know, like if you've got a bratty bottom and a top who appreciates it, or at least can brat right back, right? You know, then you end up in that whoever wrestles better ends up on the bottom, right? You know.
Sure. Well, in that case that I was referring to, I was paddling his ass, and he's like, "Is that as hard as you can go? Is that as hard as you can go?" What he could have done is, once I let him go, he could have showed me how hard he could have gone.
Duly noted.
Now I'm being bratty.
Takes one to know one. There's another question. What is it like to top someone who has topped you? Does it ever end up in any sort of confusion?
I mean, I'm sure it's possible that it can, but if both players are secure with themselves, and I guess it would depend on the roles that you define for each other.
I also think I think what this touches on, and this is a whole other can of worms, is I think some people identify, like, kink is part of their identity. You know, as if I identify as homosexual, people identify as kinky or identify as a dom, and it's much more a part of that identity than it is for myself, for example. So for me, like that seems like an odd situation that wouldn't happen, because people are people. It's a role that I'm filling, and it depends on the chemistry. I can understand though how for people for whom it's an identity that might be more confusing. That's just not my personal experience.
I think it really varies a lot depending on the person and the type of connection you have with that person. And it's, you know, there are plenty of people that, you know, one day I'll top them and another day they'll top me. And then there are certain people that, you know, I have only ever bottomed to them and I could not possibly imagine topping them, or vice versa. And so I think it's a really, personal thing, the way your connection works.
I'll echo that. It really is dependent upon the relationship you have with that particular person. And I don't switch a lot with the same people historically. I have a few people I do that with, but when I think about all the people I do play with, and it's mostly from me as from a dom perspective, I would have absolutely no problem with them topping me or being dom to me at all. It just doesn't happen very often, but don't think I would have any problem with it.
I don't perceive any of the four of you as being monogamously inclined necessarily in your relationships, right? And so in some ways, there's a freedom to be able to have individual connections with different people, right? And be able to switch in different ways based on that. Figuring out ways to do both extremes with the same person, even if not in the same scene. A clear separation of roles with a person before. So it's definitely lots of discovery. How do you make that work?
Yeah, and that's a very good point, because I think all four of us have poly dynamics in some way, shape, or form. So we play with a lot of different types of players and on both ends of the spectrum. I was in a monogamous relationship for 9 years, didn't take, but it was very hard to change those dynamics in that particular relationship. I think with any dynamic, any relationship, it's all about communication. So that's where you start. And if you want to switch things up, you have to start that dialogue.
I think it's about candidness as well, and being honest with yourself. I think there's an assumption in the question that the partner is also interested in switching in this dynamic. And I think the onus is on both of the people to be honest about if switching is something they actually want to do. And if not, what questions does that raise?
That raises the question of opening the relationship. That's the question it raises.
I have seen that happen. I've seen a few scenarios where people do genuinely want to switch, and then it works out well, and it's open communication, and all is fine and good. Some people start as dom sub, and then I know a couple who they flipped, and now the other is the boy to the sir, and they are very happy in this flipped dynamic. And then I see some other relationships where one person really wants the other partner to be something that they're not, and that communication is something that I think can be facilitated. And I think as long as people are candid and willing to have the conversations, that's a positive thing.
I think certainly one of the things I've discovered coming out as a switch kind of later in life is that our sexuality is not fixed. It's not. I mean, there are kinks I like now that I didn't think I would like back then. There's positions, there's mindsets, there's roles, there's all sorts of things that I probably would not have in a million years thought I would have done when I was 25 or 30. And once I was 50, 60, I'm like, oh yeah, that. So when you're in a relationship with someone, especially long-term, it's almost assured that their sexualities are going to change. They're going to be jerking off when they're alone to different things over time. And somehow negotiating that, talked about communication, so that you get your needs met, especially if it's in a monogamous relationship. That's tough. Not insurmountable, but it is tougher.
How do you think the bottom top switch identification translate or don't into community politics?
I do think that in some, I'm going to say this carefully, in some smaller communities or very insular communities, sometimes doms in particular seem to believe that they can take over, and that if somebody is a switch, they somehow are less than. I find this far more in the heterosexual community than I do in the gay or queer communities, but I do see that where, and the moment they sense weakness, which is how they equate it, is wrong, but that's how they see it. They all of a sudden feel like they don't necessarily have the right to assume community power in the same way that an exclusive dom does. Thankfully, that's rare enough in my world, but I've traveled enough to see it, to know that it happens.
It's interesting. Like there was a little bit of lore. I worked on the Leather Leadership Conference for a couple of years, and when we brought it here to San Francisco, and there was always a lore that if you ever wanted anything done, you get a slave or a sub to do it, right? Because they were the best organizers to get it done. That's an alternate reality to what you're describing, Grace.
Yeah, but I do think there's sometimes people that categorize switches as somehow not being on par with the doms. And like I said, I see it mostly in the heterosexual world, not in the gay world.
Yeah, there was Gavin on people are trying to communicate in various ways. So on our Discord stream, Gavin was wondering about the connection between sort of bottom shaming, homophobia, misogyny, women being less than they are essentially bottoms in straight sex. So like you end up, getting that reinforced in those situations as you're talking about it, Race. So
that was the stigma I was talking about before, about being a bottom, the bottom shaming of it. And yeah, trying to kind of emasculate kind of and make less than in certain circles. But I think as more and more people come out as switch and proud of being switch, I think that's happening way less, which I'm really happy to see.
I mean, I think for my previous example, that was very much the case with me, and it took just a lot of new experiences and challenging myself to get rid of that. And my partner has a little hobby horse about like 50% of heteronormative society are shoved into top bottom roles that they don't necessarily want, right? Like straight men who might otherwise be bottoms are forced to be tops because that's the societal expectation, and some straight women who are forced to be bottoms. It's societal expectations are odd in that way, but yeah, I think there's something to that.
I also think there's an age discrimination to it too, that the older person has to be the dom and the younger person has to be the sub. That's not necessarily true. And I've seen lots of great younger doms and I've seen lots of great older subs. So I think that is just kind of just an expectation when you see two people that you put on them. That one must be the top, he's older. That one's the bottom, he's younger.
Subconscious biases are real.
There's also a bias around physical size. Most of the people that I've collared over my lifetime are fairly significantly bigger because I'm not a very big person. So we'll go somewhere and they automatically assume that they're the dom if they don't know us because they're physically bigger, often much more muscular. So
yeah, you always go for those big subs.
I do often. It's I don't know why.
Same with Bondage. It's like most of the men I play with are quite larger than me, and yeah, I think it's always a bit of mind fuck, and it also comes up within the straight pan communities that I interact with, because especially as it pertains to rope bondage, most of them are tying up smaller women. It's straight men tying up smaller than them women, and then when I'm like, oh well, I have a dude who's 150 pounds heavier than me, how do I do this? They're like
and they always run out of their rope too quick. They're like, oh
yeah, no, and I mean,
it's tie this bite.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool because tying up bears and being a big old fag, it's all of the I would say normative bottoms who exist in the rope world. There's like solidarity there, and it's nice to just get different representation because it helps more than just bears get tied up, right? Helps anyone outside of the norm.
Yeah,
of what's like represented, especially on social media.
I was thinking about sort of as our society changes, right, and we work less on bottom shaming and more on claiming versatile and moving towards things being more socially acceptable, whether we see more and more people identifying as switch more. Do you see those trends?
I think when I go to some of the big leather events, for example, guys clearly marking themselves as switch, flagging that way, actually being out there about it seems to be much more prevalent. And it does seem to be more prevalent the younger they get.
I see this younger generation coming up, and they explore more, and they're less about the labels. They don't really even identify themselves as top or bottom or switch. They are just in it to play, and wherever the play takes them, they're happy to go, which is kind of refreshing to see. Is actually, I mean, it does make role play a little murky, but I get it.
Do any of you have any specific triggers that cause you to switch?
Ask me. I know that sounds trite, but it's especially anybody with a lot of dom skill. Very often you don't get asked to switch as a bottom. So I always I don't really have a trigger. Is there something that about them I really like? And do they want to go there? I don't really think I have a trigger.
Yeah, I don't either. And I think it has a lot to do with that request. And it's like, if and just that connection and how, that interaction and what do I feel about them in particular. And I don't think I don't think I have a particular trigger either.
So I don't know if I have a trigger or not, but I do search for different things depending on my mood. Like if I'm on recon, I will change the filters to 100% to 50% top. And if I'm in a different mood, I'll do it the other way. So I look specifically because most people don't label themselves as verse. They pick one. So when I'm looking to do one or the other, I'll look for one or the other.
Yeah, I think that echoes my practices on it. I think I switch fairly frequently, the kind of week to week, and it really is just like, I'm really in the mood to get, tied up or hit. So maybe I'll fire off a message to so and so, or I have this like a standing date with my puppy to we tie once a week kind of thing. So.
Which we may be shooting ourselves in the foot here, trying to tell everyone to be verse, because when we need the tops, they're all going to be bottoms now. And when we need the bottom, they're all going to be tops now. So disregard everything we just said.
My little pet theory is that most of the people in San Francisco are really just verse bottoms. We'll top if we have to, but everyone else.
To Chris's point too, I mean, Vince has seen me do this on site, so he knows very well that I flip my status all the time.
Right.
And it says it varies from verse top to verse bottom, or verse depending upon my mood. And it says that right in my profile that I may be flagging this right now on my profile, but talk to me if you want to. I may or may not want to go a different way, but don't assume that I only go this. But I will go fishing with that mindset.
If you think about it, a lot of people talk about, well, it's the connection for me. It's, in some ways a romanticism around it, right? So does romance or that energy or that chemistry change how that works for you? I think, Grace, you're romantically inclined in a lot of ways in terms of people that you connect with and when you play.
Yeah, I always say I'm kind of an anonymous slut, but I also am sort of a demisexual at the same time. And I really like being intimate with somebody and the romance. So admittedly, and I don't know why this is the case, I require even more on the romance side to sub than I do the other way. It just seems to be,
So you're vulnerable when you're sub. You can be more standoffish and in control when you're at the top. So when I'm at an event or something, usually I'm tired because I'm working the Mr. S booth or what's safe word booth. And so I usually want to sub at events. So I'm always flagging my handkerchief on the right. And usually I am not looking for that intimate connection. I am looking for wham, bam, hurt me. I want to play. I want the physicality of it. So it doesn't always have to be emotional. I think BDSM can be very therapeutic just on the physicality of it. But when you are able to add the emotional aspect to it, it just makes it 1,000 times better, but not always necessary for me.
I was just gonna say I differentiate, for me especially, bottoming and subbing, topping and doming. So I could go to a horse market party and get fucked by 20 guys, and I don't necessarily see that as subbing. But I know I don't. I mean, in
How
my
did you
head,
get on this panel?
but to sub is, for me, is more of an emotional thing. I don't know. That's just the way my sub brain works.
Is that because you kind of dehumanize yourself in that aspect, because it's like the horse market? It's just you can't see anything anyway.
I guess. And plus I'm in my own little fantasy world.
Right.
You know, unless you're a friend who walks up and starts fucking me and tells me that you're my friend and I know who it is.
Because you can't see anything at the horse market.
I think a lot of us share similarities in terms of how we view that, and I'm no exception insofar as I like playing with friends. So you know, there's like QIFs, queer intimate friendships, right? Like, what is it to have someone that you're having sex with or doing BDSM with regularly, and you're also friends with them and doing activities, right? It's not a boyfriend, but it's a queer intimate friendship. So I generally prefer that. I do like having friends with whom I'm doing intimate things. But one thing that's been fun about BDSM and that like emotional connection, at least for me, is that it's opened me up to playing with people who identify as cis women, and like trans women who otherwise, as a gay man, I would not be interested in playing with. You know, with BDSM, there's an emotional connection that like I like connecting to other humans. And so it doesn't have to have an emotional connection, but having the emotional connection has enabled me to kind of queer and diversify the people I'm playing with and how I'm connecting to them. But it's certainly not necessary. I think it's just an added bonus.
And quiff. See, this is why I love your
New,
direction.
yeah.
I learn new words every single time I talk to you. I never heard this quiff thing.
I never heard it either.
Okay. Thank you for teaching us, Vince.
I'll pass the note to my therapist.
Oh, yeah. And I also think, you know, having that interpersonal relationship is certainly an advantage, but also not entirely necessary.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. So when it comes to switching, do you ever find that you have like a type? If you're at the club or out cruising, do you ever find that you see a person and you're like, oh, I find this person attractive? Do you ever find yourself saying, oh, I would like them to dom me, or oh, I would like them to sub me or sub for me? Do you ever find that you have types when you see people, or is it more of a, you're interested in learning about them as an individual within the kink community? Like how does that kind of mindset work?
My answer is easy. I'm attracted to men for whatever reason. I'm attracted to them, and I don't see them offhand by their type as being particularly dom or sub. That's how I am.
So if we're talking about just seeing somebody, I'm going to be very hypocritical here in that if they're older and more masculine and bigger than me, I'm going to want them to top me. If they're younger and smoother and just pretty, I'm going to want to dom them. That being said, if someone hit me up in a DM and I didn't know what they looked like and they started saying kinky shit to me that was all dommy, I'd be into it, and vice versa. So I guess it's dependent on if you're just looking at the physicality of someone or what's in their head, for me.
And I think for me, you know, if I find someone attractive for whatever reason, I'm perfectly willing to go explore and see which, you know, what are they into? Do they want a top? Do they want a bottom? And, you know, just go down that road there. And I think in that regard, I'm probably generally flexible to just seeing, you know, what happens and having that conversation and seeing how we interact.
I learned very early on to try not to project to project my like wants and desires onto people, because it had led to a lot of bad scenes of either me being like, oh my god, I so want to sub for you, and then it was terrible because that wasn't really what they were looking for, but you know, I insisted, or vice versa, where they said, you know, well, I'm a top but I really want to sub for you, and then it you know, the energy just sometimes didn't work. So I think I have like trained myself out of projecting that, and more fall in the Bob camp of just waiting to see.
I would open it up to any last words from you guys, from our panelists tonight. You know, do you want to recruit everybody to switchdom, or provide any last minute thoughts or advice to folks?
I'll speak to any dom leaning person that's listening, that if you're jerking off to a lot of switchy stuff, sub stuff, and you're afraid people are going to judge you for it, trust me, they aren't thinking that much about it. With rare exception, would anyone judge you for it? I threw the closet doors open of switchdom and nothing really changed, except for the better. So I just do it.
And I will pile on to that just do it, and I'll throw one other quick anecdote in here, and that the first time I was topping in public, I was really nervous about it, and you know, not so much from the perspective of, you know, oh my gosh, you know, what are people going to think, you know, I usually bottom, you know, now I'm topping, but more from the perspective of I am new at this, and you know, are people going to judge me? You know, it's not going to be perfect, and all that sort of thing, and wound up having an absolutely amazing scene. So I will pile on to Brace's comment. Just do it. Go for it.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up for me.
I just think that once you're able to go in both directions, and I know people are scared to go one way, or they're scared to put themselves out there, like Richard was just saying, and people already judge them over it. Once you overcome that, it's like coming out for the second time. There's kind of a weight off your shoulder. You don't have to worry about what everyone thinks about you. We see this we get lots of questions through what's the safe word on this topic, because there is a stigma attached to going both ways for some reason. Life's just too short not just to enjoy everything. Right? So, and it just opens up a whole new world of possibilities of different people that you're able to meet and play with. So
I will add one thing to that, that you've inspired me. You know, I think it's been interesting to me as I have gotten older and more experienced to find how specific my fantasies and fetishes and kinks can be. And, you know, a scene might not work, but if you tweak one small thing about it, all of a sudden it becomes super hot. And suddenly this thing that I wasn't into, I'm into. And yeah. I think switching and being open to switching enables you to start playing with those dials, and that is one manifestation of opening the whole new world. Is there's a lot of things that you either don't think you like or you haven't tried, and the versatility and ability to turn those dials is really empowering and freeing.
Okay, well, I just want to say thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight, and at fairly last minute. It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining us tonight. It was a great crowd. It was great to see so many faces, and we will see you in September again on Zoom. So we're going to unceremoniously kick everybody else out of the room while we go to a debrief. But thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon.
Okay, so that was kind of revealing. I have a question. So, of the four of us, we've all played with each other. Have we all switched with each other?
Yes.
You've switched with every single
everyone
one of us.
Here, yes.
What about you?
I think I have only topped you and bottomed for you.
Yeah.
So you're, like we talked about, you're specific to a person in which role you'll take.
Right. Very
Yeah.
often.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've only subbed for you. And
Yeah.
you were amazing dom.
Oh, why, thank you.
Well, thank you. So is there any advice you'd give to people who are like stuck in one role and have been thinking about going the other way? What would you tell them?
My advice would be realize that nobody really gives a fuck. That in your own head, whether you're bottom and you're nervous about topping or top and nervous about bottoming, ultimately nobody really cares. It just do whatever works for you, because you're probably putting in other people's heads what you think they're thinking about you.
Yeah. Anything?
I think what I would add to that is, as someone in early adulthood, I think one of the things I've been coming to terms with is life is too short to not pursue the things that you have agency to pursue, and if it is within your power and you want it as an adult, there is nothing stopping you from getting it, and that is okay. And it's taken me some time to actually embrace that.
Yeah.
It's good advice.
Well, thank you guys for watching this. If you have any comments about your experience, please leave them down below. And please check out Leathermen's discussion group. We'll leave the link down below. Thank you guys for joining us to do this again, live, in person. It's so great to breathe the same air.
It's amazing.
Great to be here.
See you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.